Hello, Dr. Zeeb asked me to put together a quick list of interesting tidbits taken from the Eagles Conference this last year. For those of you guys unaware, the Eagles Conference is in Dallas. To be an Eagle, you have to be an active EMS medical director with an agency that, quote, we can see from outer space. So essentially, the speakers are medical directors from agencies like FDNY, Las Vegas, LA, big agencies. The presentations there are always short, which is an interesting format. This year they were capped at 5 minutes each. It's just enough to get you interested in a topic or share some quick data, some quick tips, some quick ideas, or some quick problems, and then elicit you to go back and do some critical thinking at your own departments. And so in the spirit of that, I'm going to try and do that with my list of tidbits here. If you do get the chance to go to Eagles, I highly recommend it. It's a phenomenal conference. The first half of the first day of the conference had to do with mass casualty incidents. It can't be overstated that communications are going to be key for the success or failure of this operation. As an example, the medical director for Fort Lauderdale shared that they had an airport shooting, which was actually over in about 85 seconds, but took several hours for it to finally wind down because there was a huge breakdown in communications. People were calling 911. There was rumors going around of second shooters. There was rumors going around of multiple casualty points. And when in reality, there was one casualty point, one shooter who was arrested 85 seconds in. We need to prepare ahead of time that all of our systems are going to be overwhelmed. I think we kind of knew that anyway. But the Vegas incident really showcased that. I believe there was over 600 patients in that scenario, and just the amount of resources required for that is something that I don't think any of us can ever really truly prepare for. The upside is that we can at least start thinking through it, so that way when it happens, we can be at least a little bit prepared. One of the interesting things that came out of Vegas, and probably due to the size of the scene, the number of different casualty points, and the sheer number of victims, is hundreds and hundreds of patients were actually transported from the scene to the hospital by Uber and Lyft. Patients self-initiated calls to these agencies and got off the scene without any knowledge of triage or transport. I think that leads us into the next topic, which was the overwhelming majority of the medical directors that spoke, and there were several that spoke about several major mass casualty incidents, and they agreed unequivocally that triage tags are worthless, and frankly, our thought process behind triage and transport is not going to work the way that we think it will. I think the majority of us that have ever been in mass casualty training scenarios have been like, this is not really very realistic, and these folks really just kind of reaffirmed that. What they found is, number one, first and foremost, triage itself takes a significant amount of time, and patient acuity changes so rapidly that by the time we get done with triage, deteriorating patients have died or at least worsened, and patients who are yellow maybe have worsened as well, and now they're critical patients. So they didn't really offer a solution for this one. It was more of sharing that they have identified that we need to maybe rethink the process as a whole. And so I will pass that along to you as well. And frankly, as the Las Vegas guy shared with us, who really carries 800 triage tags anyway. So the idea of being prepared for something that large is unrealistic. A number of the medical directors also shared that in their mass casualty incidents, there were multiple collection points, multiple areas of casualties. And so, it just reaffirms that maybe the idea that we have with how mass casualty incidents will play out is just not real. So we started talking about MCI supply kits, and the suggestion was made that we should start considering having a mass casualty supply kit. I know that there are some mass casualty trailers in the area, a lot of them focused around backboards, and I think we all realize that backboards are kind of moving away from the limelight. And so what they suggested was essentially a very large cache of tourniquets, Israeli bandages, maybe some combat gauze, and then mega movers by the crate. Mega movers are going to be a much more efficient way to move these folks. So maybe that's something that we think about moving forward, and see what we can come up with as the mech. Wasn't really a clear-cut answer for this question either, but the Parkland shooting had just happened about 2 weeks prior to the Eagles, and the medical director for that agency was there. It did spur an interesting discussion point of we generally think of mass casualty incidents and how they're going to overwhelm our adult facilities. What are we going to do if we have a pediatric mass casualty incident? I think we all know that the hospitals, the adult hospitals, are ill prepared to take care of pediatric patients. But what are we going to do when we get into a scenario where children's is clearly overwhelmed? As I said, they don't really have a clear-cut solution for this. Nobody has a massive amount of pediatric hospitals in the area, and so one of the things maybe we could consider is just calling a bunch of helicopters and start flying them outside of central Ohio. I don't really have a solution for that either. One of the things that kind of surprised me in hearing those guys talk is the majority of them actually showed up on the scene and were operational in these mass casualty incidents. I had a chance to talk briefly with Dr. Zeeb about what we would do with him if he showed up on scene. It's not really very high on his radar. I don't know if he feels that he won't be able to get past perimeter security. But either way, it is something to think about. If Dr. Zeeb shows up, how would we be able to utilize him? Would he be in a triage role? Would he be in a decision-making role? Certainly, we would make an effort to not put him in a high-risk, high-danger role. But it was food for thought. How would we handle our medical director showing up? And then, please prepare now for the fallout. Those of you that have been around me know that I'm acutely aware of the value of CISD, and I think it's way underrated. And CISD is admittedly not for everyone, but there needs to be some sort of a plan for, or at least a preparation that if one of these incidents goes down, which they very well could in our area, and as a matter of fact, we've had 2 in our area in the last year with Ohio State and Kirkersville, we need to be able to prepare to deal with the mental health of our providers on these scenes. So just start thinking about that now. A lot of great discussion in terms of cardiac care. I believe this was the second morning. One of the first things they discussed was Mona Goes Lisa. I think everybody who went through paramedic school has heard the acronym MONA: morphine, oxygen, nitro, and aspirin. We're kind of moving away from that. A lot of agencies are not carrying morphine anymore. We all know that oxygen is not good for you if it's not needed. And nitro is still important, but it is maybe not as important as they thought. At least that was the route that this particular lecture was going. And aspirin remains. And so what LISA stands for is L is for let the ED know early. So as soon as you identify that you have a STEMI, let the ED know. I is for interventional emergency department. We should only be transporting these folks to hospitals that have interventional cardiology capabilities. S is for scene coordination, so doing everything that we can to minimize our scene time. If that means making our kits a little bit more user-friendly, if that means everybody on the scene identifies once we have a STEMI, just like we have a stroke or a trauma patient, load and go. Let's just get out of there. Let's get our 12 lead and let's go. And get to the hospital as quick as we can. And then aspirin remains. Aspirin continues to be indicated. It continues to show, trials show benefit to giving aspirin. And there are still trials that show nitro is valuable as well. But either way, the focus is, as I said, is Mona Goes Lisa. Another thing on there, and I did not put a bullet point to it, but it's on the same topic. Multiple 12 leads is something that we really need to start probably being more aggressive about. Several studies have found that EKGs can evolve very, very quickly, where STEMIs can appear, and I don't want to say appear and disappear in front of your eyes, but the evolution of your 12 lead can change very rapidly. And so repeat 12 leads on the way to the hospital is something that can be important. There was another agency that has experimented with high-dose nitro. That was St. Louis Fire Department. This is giving 2 to 5 tablets in the initial dose and in the follow-up doses. Were in cardiac cases, some were in CHF and pulmonary edema cases, and they were actually moving towards push-dose nitro. It was more of a, this is kind of something that we're studying right now. We've seen some limited success, so they didn't really give a whole heck of a lot of data about it. And so this is, as I said, in the spirit of Eagles, I'm putting it out there to kind of whet your appetite. Maybe you'll Google it, look a little bit more further into it, and see if that's something that's interesting to you. A lot of talk about epi. First and foremost, the drug shortage is real. Now, this doesn't just affect epi. As we all know, the drug shortages are widespread, and it just depends on week to week what drug is going to be on shortage. At the time of this conference, epi was on nationwide shortage. Couldn't find it, couldn't get it. And so there was, several things that we thought that we could toss around and, maybe they would help with us. One of them was maybe we should start capping epi at 3 to 5 milligrams for cardiac arrest. So you have a cardiac arrest run rather than just throwing epi at them every 3 minutes until we've expended all the epi that we have. We give them 3 and move on with life. Another discussion point was maybe we should consider not giving epi in cardiac arrest. Please remember that the only thing that's ever been shown to actually affect cardiac arrest survival rates, that is folks that are walking home from the hospital, is high-quality early initiation of CPR. So epi has not been shown to increase that rate. Obviously, it increases your rate of ROSC, but for now, there is no data to suggest that epi is actually beneficial to overall survival rates. So that's another way that we can consider. Another thing that was brought up is maybe we give less epi, but we time it better. One study out of, I don't remember, looked at ventricular cardiac arrest, VFib and VTAC, and they found high success rates, or at least higher success rates, when epi was given after the second shock. So rather than giving it first line, giving it right off the bat, maybe we decrease the amount of epi we give it at the right times, and help the patient and help the nationwide shortage. And then anybody who knows me knows how much I love the idea of push-dose epi as a vasopressor to replace epi drips and previously dopamine. It was brought up again at the conference. It just seems to be something that's not going away. It was first introduced in an EM-Crit podcast several years ago. I can't even remember when, but it's a very viable alternative to vasopressors that we have. It's a very benign drug. It's a very cheap drug when we can get it, but we don't have it yet. It was just a discussion point, so just think about that. So trauma rest, nothing extraordinary came out about trauma rest except to say that trauma rest is actually a little bit more survivable than maybe we once believed. I think a lot of us have felt for a long time that trauma rest is dead and that's the end of the discussion. But actually 2 recent studies, and I had just researched this for a trauma class that I had put on, 2 recent studies actually kind of showed that trauma arrest survival rates were similar to cardiac arrest or medical cardiac arrest survival rates, which is to say we throw everything in the kitchen sink at medical cardiac arrest. Maybe we should start being a little bit more aggressive with traumatic cardiac arrest. Now that obviously doesn't take into account, obvious death, missing half the body or clear and obvious reasons that this is not survivable. But what it is to say is that, just because somebody is in arrest and they've come to be in that state because of an injury doesn't mean that they are just dead. And so maybe we should be a little bit more aggressive on our care for trauma rest. And of course, community health and community paramedicine continues to be all the rage nationwide. It is not going anywhere anytime soon. I don't think this is any surprise to the MEC agencies, as we've been pretty aggressive in our approach to community paramedicine. It's interesting to find some of the things from across the nation that medical directors are reporting as being cutting edge and innovative in terms of community paramedicine are things that we're doing. So that's a pat on the back to our community paramedicine folks. You guys are doing a great job. You guys are at the cutting edge right now of what's going on in the nation. Obviously, there's multiple different models. There's private agencies, there's public agencies, there's nurse practitioners working for fire departments. There's a multitude of different ways that it's being delivered, and nobody has the magic formula yet. But we're all trying, and we're all trying to make a difference in our communities. The opiate crisis is, of course, nationwide, and there are programs, including the one here with MEC, that are working closely with methods of how to try to address this. Interestingly enough, some of these programs are actually involved with Suboxone administration and monitoring. I know our program is involved with Hope Task Force, and we are moving into a drug court with rehab as being a viable option afterwards that we're going to be closely involved with. So the opiate crisis, as I said, is nationwide. One of the avenues, from the EMS standpoint, we take care of the immediate need and we get them to the hospital. And then our community paramedic programs, both in the MEC and then nationwide, are working to see if they can mitigate the issue on the back end. Stop the Bleed campaign continues to grow steam. It seems to be the mission of these folks is to make it as identifiable and as easy to use as an AED, and they seem to be having some successes with that. We're all aware of what Stop the Bleed is. If you're not, I would suggest you Google it. It's a decent program, and so I would expect to see more of that in the future. Community CPR initiatives, as I said, the only thing that really has ever been shown to increase cardiac arrest survival rates is early initiation of high-quality CPR. And so that should be one of the focuses, I think, of everybody within the MEC, is how we get more CPR out into our community. I know Laerdal actually came out with a quote, family and friends CPR anytime kit, which comes with a little CPR mannequin and a video. It's $40. They're $40 each, and it's literally designed to give to members of your community, to drop it off at a church, to drop it off wherever you think it would be beneficial, and then allow these folks to train themselves on CPR. It's an interesting avenue. I think maybe it's something we should look into as a MEC, and see if we can't get some more CPR out in the community. That's all I have for you guys. This is my first Vizio, or my first MEC video, so I hope it was beneficial for you. Again, I can't recommend this conference enough. It's out in Dallas. It's every year. If you can get to it, it's probably the best conference I've ever been to. So, thanks.